Welcome to the DEA Chicago Podcast. I'm Luis Agostini. The past few episodes, we've had the chance to speak with parents who've lost loved ones due to fatal fentanyl poisonings. We've also spoke with DEA agents who've been investigating those fatal fentanyl poisonings. Today, we bring those two worlds together, and we are honored and pleased to have Susan Fox and the Assistant Special Agent in charge of the Indianapolis District Office, Mike Gannon. Susan, Mike, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for asking me.
Thank you for having me, Luis. Appreciate it. And Susan, thank you for doing this with us. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
So, Susan, we've known you for several years now. You've attended our
Mhm.
family summits that we've hosted. So, we obviously, myself and Mike, are very familiar with your story and the background and everything that's happened. But for those of us, those listening who haven't had a chance to hear your story and hear Nathan's story and know who Nathan is, feel free to take some time to just share with us who Nathan was, what he meant to you, what he was as a boy, his hobbies and activities, and then his becoming a young man. So feel free, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, Nathan was, first of all, my my little miracle baby. I was told I wouldn't probably never be able to have children, and after numerous surgeries and failed fertility attempts, I was kind of gave up, and then I got pregnant with Nathan. And his name means a gift, and that's what he's been, continues to be. As a little boy, he was all boy. He was he would be disruptive in class sometimes, we'd get calls because he's throwing paper wads into the trash basket or getting out of his seat. That he was all Nathan was he was very passionate and focused in everything that he did. And he was kind of, if he didn't have something, when he had something to focus on, he was hyper focused. But if he didn't have something to focus on, he was all over the place. And he went to he he stayed in a private Christian school. My gosh, from kindergarten all the way through high school, and he was he did average. He did average in school. He was very intelligent, but he would get distracted and forgetful sometimes with his homework. But he uh, he loved sports. He was always in some kind of sport. He played basketball in grade school, junior high, and high school. He went to high school at Lutheran High over on the southeast side of Indianapolis, and actually he played football in high school, and he played for three out of 4 years
What
doing
position?
that. And I don't know. I should know, but I don't. I didn't. I always had a hard time understanding football. I just
Eh,
went to see him play.
that's good.
Um, yeah, but he, Nathan he was very compassionate and kind. He had a great sense of humor. One of my favorite memories of him that I can laugh about still, when he was about 12 or 13, we were going somewhere in the van. It was nighttime, and I hit a raccoon, and I love animals, and I was really upset that I hit a raccoon. And so Nathan countered me being upset with turning it into. It's like, Mom, did you see that raccoon? He stood in the middle of the street and had his paws over his eyes. He knew you were going to hit
Oh,
him, and it
geez.
was just a. and it was he had an interesting sense of humor, and it worked with us, with him and I. And for months after, he would tell his friends, my mom murdered a raccoon, and I would laugh and he would laugh, and he was also a very very honest kid. One of my proudest mom moments was when we went to buy fireworks. He was probably 10 or 11 years old, and on our way out of the tent, he said he needed to go back. And I was kind of in a hurry. Why do you want to go back? We can't get anything else. And he said, I forgot to pay. I don't think he charged me for this pack or whatever he had. And so we went back. I follow him back in, and I watched my son go up to the guy and say, "This is my receipt, and this is what I got. I don't think that you charged me." And the guy took me aside before we left, and he said that he's never had a kid come up and do that of his own volition. And I don't know. That was a real proud moment for me.
Pretty
Um,
noble of a young kid. Do so,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and yeah. So and yeah, so he's really into MMA. He loves as he got older, he loved watching the fights. You know, and he'd have friends over here, and he'd either save his allowance or after he had a job, you know, he'd pay. I think it was like $50, and he would pay. I was to rent it on cable,
Yeah.
and have his friends over. Um, so yeah, and he great encourager, very thoughtful and compassionate. I remember him asking me one time if I was okay. He thought I seemed kind of depressed, and I said no, just working a lot and probably a little bit getting older. And he says, "Yeah, probably menopause, Mom."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but he would. Yeah, he's. We had a really as Nathan grew matured. A lot of the tensions that came with his teenage years just fell away,
Yeah.
and he came to live back home. Um, and he was 26. He wanted to get his bills paid off. He worked two jobs and had started a side business, and he wanted to get his bills paid off, especially his car. And so he moved in here. He paid me rent, um, much lower amount, obviously, than if he were on his own. And he paid all his bills off and uh, made a good dent in his car loan. So he had goals, and yeah. So
Susan, you know what I notice is just listening to you. Uh, Sounds like you just had an unbelievable situation with you and Nathan, and like you said, a miracle baby, and having him involved with sports and just really engaged and being good with people. It's like this is where you realize this could happen to anybody in any family. And when we look at like the fatalities that happen, throughout the United States, and have all the statistics from 2023 where there was 112,000 Americans that died because of a drug overdose, it's obvious that fentanyl played a significant role in that. But you just realize like there's so many good people that have been poisoned because of fentanyl. It's just devastating, and my heart just breaks for you just to even hearing that. So thank you so much for sharing that.
And
yeah, and then
I'm so sorry to build off of that. Like even our boss, the special agent in charge, Sheila Lyons, she's made it a point. She has two boys. Mike has how many? You have Mike has a daughter. You have how many kids, Mike?
Yeah, I have a boy and a girl. Yeah, a daughter and a son. Yeah.
I have a 22-year-old boy, and I have my youngest is 14 months. He is a miracle baby. He took so I definitely empathize with that part where um the challenges with fertility and so but go back to say our boss has mentioned that nobody she not even she the head of the DEA in Chicago is invulnerable from this happening. This really can happen to anybody. So just to build on Mike, what Mike was saying.
yeah, and that is something that I hope we can get to talk more about because I mean, as Nathan was not a drug addict, um, and so when that's how I knew something was wrong, and that's why that's an important statement. I knew something was wrong because he lived with me and he was home every night, every single night.
Yeah.
He worked two jobs, and it could, and I personally know several people, and then a couple of stories, through other people where someone has died. Usually a teenager. There was one guy. He was about 19 years old, and he was having a really bad toothache, and he couldn't get into the dentist until Monday. It was over a weekend, so he got a pain pill from a friend, and it killed him. It was laced with
Jeez.
fentanyl,
Jeez.
and then there's a student, kids who are in school who just need to take something to help them study, or whatever it is they think they need to do better in school, and they're dead. And I think fentanyl is different than every other drug. It's not something people can say, well, they knew the risk. I think where fentanyl is involved, it's murder.
And that's what we've been,
Because they're,
yeah, that's what we've been trying. ASAC Gannon, all the folks here have been really trying to harp on is that there really never has been a safe time to engage in substance use. But even
Mhm.
it's even deadlier now with fentanyl really being laced in every kind of drug that there is, and even being pressed into looking like a pill that you would get prescribed by your doctor, but it's fake. And right now, we have half of those pills that we seize have enough fentanyl to kill you.
Yeah, and I think what makes it so challenging with fentanyl is breaking that stigma. Because I think probably a majority of the deaths are drug addicts, and that's something painfully that I've learned through Nathan's death is that when a drug addict dies, or if someone thinks they're a drug addict, their life is given less value. And I know that's starting to change. I'm here in Indianapolis a lot because the work that Mike and his team have done to collaborate with law enforcement here in Marion County. But that stigma is it's a real challenge to break through, especially with just the general public. Um, and that's
Yeah,
something that I would like to, work
yeah.
towards.
I think we have a ton of work to do and keep working to do that. And I think it's so important when parents speak out, because, like I always say, one life lost is one too many.
Yes.
We have a tremendous amount of work to do. And just to kind of reiterate what you and Luis were talking about a little bit earlier, it's so important to message to people. Like, there's never been a worse time in our country to use illegal drugs than right now. Because I always try to tell people, you just don't know how many times a drug can exchange hands before it gets to the streets here in Indianapolis. And on average, it could be 5, 6, 7, or 8 times that someone else had that drug in their possession. And they could put whatever they want. And as we all know, fentanyl is so potent and highly addictive and easy to get and inexpensive to get. You can throw that in with all these other drugs and say it's a certain drug, but really you got the fentanyl in there, and you just don't know when there's more than that 2 milligrams in that dosage unit. And it still goes back to even some of the things you just shared, Susan, where a person had a toothache, so they were trying to get a pill from someone over a weekend, and it turned out to kill them. That's why it's so important for us to message, hey, you only take a prescription looking pill if you went to the doctor. And if you're under 18, you went to the doctor with your parents, they examine you and determine your body could handle a prescription they're going to give you, and it was a medical necessity. And then the most important thing is you got it from a registered licensed pharmacy,
Yeah.
never a friend or a drug dealer from the street. And that's the messaging that we have to keep bringing out. And I know you do a lot of stuff, Susan, talking to various platforms and individuals that have gone through similar situations, and go out and do a really good job trying to help educate people. And I think it's so important that we all understand that, don't you?
I do, because it's I mean, it's not. I think if a lot of people's perspective, if we can change that, then we can make a lot of headway quicker. Um, because I knew, I'd heard about fentanyl. I'd seen some commercials, and I'm in recovery. I've been sober for 28 years, so I've had a lot of friends pass away, and it wasn't until after my son died that I realized probably every one of those deaths involved fentanyl. And I'd heard about it and I'd seen it, but I didn't think that it applied to me because my son didn't use hard drugs. I never had a talk with him. I found out later that him and his, after he died, I found out that him and his friends had discussed it, so he was aware of the dangers of fentanyl, which is where it's important for me to say he didn't know that's what he was getting, which I think is also the case with a lot of victims.
So
Yeah, there's no question about that. I mean, I think when you take a drug, you're at the mercy and you're not understanding that, hey, this could be the time. And, we've seen instances, Luis, and I know that you're really good at getting the data out to us as a public information officer and giving us the newest trends and what's going on. But, we've seen instances where they break up a pill, right? And they want to take a quarter of the pill just to take that. And then obviously, unfortunately, the quarter of the pill was the one that had over 2 milligrams, which is considered a lethal dosage unit in it. So it's like you can't even try to outsmart a pill. Don't you agree with that, Luis?
no, absolutely. And even when it comes to testing a pill, what I've seen some folks really good analogies is that the chocolate chip cookie analogy, where when you're baking cookie and making the dough, when you dump in the chocolate chips and you start making cookies, not every cookie will have the same amount of chocolate chips. So when it comes to testing a pill with a test strip, even if you break off a portion of that pill and perform that fentanyl test strip, there's no guarantee that the portion you tested, it's not an equal distribution of fentanyl. So really, again, it's not, just in general, not safe to consume a pill that was not prescribed to you by a doctor, physician, or dispensed at a registered pharmacy. Um,
Yeah, it's crazy the trust that people think they have in people. And I say this all the time, like when someone's out there dealing drugs, they just don't care. They're caring about making the money. And really, like, we got to get people understanding you can't be dealing that in the first place, especially when you have no idea what's in it.
Right.
so Susan, if it's okay, let's go back. So you spoke about your understanding of really no history of substance abuse during that time. But if you can, just this was almost about 4.5 years ago. But if you can, just walk us through that time frame of when that day in July of 2020, um, when everything happened, when you received the news that Nathan had passed away.
Well, first I want to, so Nathan did smoke weed, um, and it was something that he had cut back on significantly in the past couple years. He knew it wasn't good he was starting to realize it wasn't good for his mental health. Initially, he used it to help him because he struggled with a lot of depression and anxiety, and he didn't like taking medication because of the way it made him feel. And so he smoked weed, and we had a lot of arguments over that. And then as he got older, I realized that arguing with him and preaching to him was not effective with him. And so I start taking a different approach, and I just say, how are you doing with that? And then he started being more open with me, you know, if I didn't try and tell him what to do. And he knew he could never have it here, um, so he never did any of that around me. He did in his early 20s, he experimented, with some drugs. But he had outgrown all of that, like I said, and he was real responsible. And so the day that I got the phone call, it was Sunday, and it was Nathan got off work around noon. He usually worked a half day on Sundays, and I was just doing stuff around the house, and I never, ever, ever call him at work. I mean, never. And for some reason that day, I tried to call his cell phone about 11:45, and there was no answer. And about 30 to 45 minutes after I tried to call him, I got a call from a 327 number, which I knew was Marion County, and I thought it might just be someone I know trying to call from jail. So I did not answer the call. But I did get a voicemail. So I checked that immediately, and it was a call from a Deputy Hyatt. He didn't say who he was with, just Deputy Hyatt. And so I called him back right away. And I remember I was standing at the back door when I was talking to him and looking outside. And I remember every detail, which is really strange because there's so much in the following weeks and months I can't remember. But when I got that phone call, he asked me if I was Nathan May's mother, and I said yes. And then he told me he regretted to inform me that Nathan was found deceased in his car in a hotel parking lot. And I knew immediately that something was wrong. I mean, I obviously can't begin to describe all the emotions that went through me. I was angry at him for calling me and not knocking on my door. Part of my brain thought they had to have the wrong person, because for my son to be in a hotel parking lot dead meant that he was hooking up for sex or doing drugs, and I knew that he didn't do either of those. So I asked some questions. I hung up the phone, and I had a friend staying with me, and he was mowing my yard, and I walked out into the middle of the yard. I was in shock, of course. And I remember sitting down in the middle of my yard and looking around, and there were people walking their dogs and riding bicycles with their kids. And I remember having the thought, how can they be outside doing this? Don't they know that Nathan died? And then I thought, how am I going to tell his dad and his stepmom? And how am I going to tell my parents? They've already lost 2 grandchildren. And I don't know. I just sat there. I was just in shock. And I don't know how long I sat there, but I got up and went over and told my friend that I just got a call that Nathan was found dead. And he just kind of half carried me to the other side of the yard, and I collapsed. I remember being curled up and just wailing. And I don't remember like getting up. I don't remember immediately what happened after that, but I kicked into autopilot, I think, pretty quick. And it was like a switch in me just flipped, and I had to take care of business. I had to tell his dad, was the first thing I had to do. And I dreaded. That's the hardest thing, other than losing my son, that I've ever had to do. So I went over and I told his dad and stepmom, and then I went and told his ex-girlfriend Savannah. They had been broken up for a while, but they had remained very good friends. I mean, they still spent significant amount of time together and go out to dinner and help each other with their pets. And so she, went and told her, and I had to hold her while she screamed and wailed and cried probably for 20 minutes, because I couldn't leave her until I knew someone was going to be there. I mean, some of her friends were around, but I was waiting until I knew that her mom could get there, or sister, I can't remember who. And then I went and pulled up to my parents' house, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't go in and tell them, because, like I said, they'd already lost 2 grandkids. And so I drove over to my brother's house instead, and I called my nephew, and I let them know that Nathan was found dead, and I asked them to come with me to tell my parents. And that's kind of where I don't remember a lot after that. I remember later being at home that same day, sitting on the porch, and Savannah, Nathan's ex-girlfriend, was here. And this really important because this whole time my brain was like, something's wrong, something's wrong. And Nathan, he didn't do hard drugs, something's wrong. And so Nathan, his bank account and his phone were linked up to my account. So I got on AT&T's website to see who he had spoken with last. And he had made 5 phone calls. And I think he made them while he was here Saturday, the day before. And the first 4, I recognized all of those numbers, and no one had answered. So my guess is, he had the day off. I found out later he had plans that didn't fall through, or that fell through. And so he was trying to call some other people he would normally hang out with, and he couldn't get a hold of him. The 5th number I didn't recognize. So my nephew called it, and I remember him saying, "So you're Hunter?" And I remember Savannah screaming and saying, "If that's Hunter McSwain, then he gave Nathan fentanyl." Like, she knew right away. And I found out later that a lot of, their circle of friends had broke ties with Hunter because he was going down that path, with the fentanyl. And so I think that evening, even, I didn't go, but one of my friends and my nephew and Savannah and a couple of her sisters, over the next few days, I drove the hotel staff crazy. And I ended up finally going myself and talking to someone there and just asking questions about, where was Nathan's car parked? How long was it there? Because we're trying to figure out how someone didn't see his car. I mean, he sat in his car was parked near the main entrance for 17 hours. He sat in his car dying, and we couldn't figure out how no one saw him. So there were, as you can imagine, all kinds of scenarios going through my head, and I was just trying to figure it out. There was no activity on his phone after he left the house, and that there was a red flag. I called the coroner's office back multiple times in the following week, and I asked questions about, were Nathan's keys on the floor in the ignition? Was his car running? Were his windows up? What did you find? Where was he parked? And tried to put all that information together. Am I getting too far ahead?
No, please. Again, this is your platform.
Okay.
So please.
Okay. I got the name of the detective that was on the case, and I called him. And I did not call him right away. I ended up calling Hunter McSwain. He came to Nathan's funeral, and he had some cryptic posts on Facebook. And I called and left him a message, and I asked him, I told him I needed to talk to him. Didn't want any trouble, but if he didn't return my call, we would have some issues. And he did call me back, and he came to my house. And this was the day after my son's funeral. So Nathan died July 26th. This was August 3rd, I think, 2nd or 3rd. And so I had a couple of people here at the house, and me and Hunter sat out back. And my friend who was staying here, his name was Kevin, he said, "You better record that conversation." And I'm like, okay. Again, like, I was on autopilot, so he told me to do it. And I thought, well, that's a good idea, because I'm probably not going to remember anything. So I recorded that conversation, and probably over 2 hours, maybe 10 minutes of it was directly related to him giving Nathan fentanyl. He admitted that he gave it to him. He said that Nathan knew what it was, that he warned him not to take it. I found out that there was a 3rd person present with them. So So I sat on that. I sat on that information, um, for a few days, and then uh, I had the irony in all this for me is that 6 months prior to this, I think it was in February, I had been at a 12-step meeting in recovery, and Hunter came up to me, and I didn't recognize him, and hey, do you remember me? He said, you're Nathan's mom, aren't you? And I'm like, yeah. And he said, I know those pink shoes anywhere. And, so Hunter was, he was, I think, court ordered to meetings. He was on a bracelet. And I had told him that night, I can give you some phone numbers of some guys, just let me know if you want some other help, you know, expand your network. And I never heard from him. And I remember telling Nathan when I got home that night, hey, I saw Hunter in a meeting. I think he's doing pretty good. And Nathan was glad to hear that. So the reason I bring that up is because after I had that conversation with Hunter at my house after Nathan's funeral, I uh, I invited him to a meeting. I invited him to go to a meeting with me on a Wednesday night, and he agreed to go, which surprised me. And he was even texting me all the way up until a half hour before, and then he never showed up. I personally think someone told him, "What are you, an idiot? Don't go." But he didn't show up. And then I had a conversation. I have a neighbor who works for IMPD who's retired, and I reached out to him. I was really torn because I had given Hunter my word that our conversation would stay between us, and yet he had told me he gave Nathan fentanyl, and now Nathan was dead. And then I knew he was an addict, and and I wanted to help him, and he and then he didn't show up, which kind of told me he wasn't serious about changing things. So I just had a lot of feelings and thoughts going through my head. And of course, there's that mother part of me that really just wanted bad things to happen to him. But I was trying to focus on something different. And so I talked to my friend, and he told me that he could not give me any advice or tell me what to do. But he spent a significant amount of time talking to me about accountability, and I had a lot of respect for this man because he'd been with IMPD for, I don't know, 30, 35 years. And so I prayed on it, and I think it was Friday of that week. So it took me about 5 days to decide to pursue anything. And I called a detective, and he came over, he listened to the recording, and then he left without Nathan's phone. We had some contact for a few months, but then he shut me down along with the prosecutor's office. So that was kind of like from the moment I got the call, I was just alternating between being a pile on the floor and trying to get up and fight for Nathan.
Well, first, thank you so much for, again, I just could only imagine, just it's almost re-traumatizing or just really painful. I can't imagine it gets any easier, recounting an experience like that. Mike, you and I, unfortunately, we've received, every story and case obviously is very unique, but we receive a lot of these phone calls and stories. From your perspective, both as a federal investigator and as a human being and a parent, when you hear these calls, when we have parents like Susan reach out to you, to us, how does that impact you? Like, what goes through your mind as a DEA agent, career agent, and as a father?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's so many variables that come into play with that, right? As a parent, a good human being, and just getting a call like that, and just to have to listen to Susan talk about all that, it just breaks your heart, and it's really hard to handle these calls. But what as a professional, what comes to my mind, like, how would I want to be treated calling somebody? You have to just think of what a family member has to go through. They have to pick up the phone, have the courage to call someone they don't even know, and then pour their heart out to them and explain what happened to their loved one. And it's not easy. And I always try to give them my best attention when I'm talking to them, and let them know how much I care. And then the hard part that I think you and I get, Luis, and I know Susan knows, because she's really picked up on what we do with these investigations and how we do it to hold people accountable. These are challenging cases to make, because the evidence, it's not easy to put all that evidence together and have all that evidence. And her particular case on the death of Nathan, there was some really great evidence that she was able to obtain, and that we were able to kind of work up. And I think you have questions on that down the road. But when you get these calls, all we want to do as investigators and caring people is be able to tell them, hey, we're going to help you out. We're going to do everything we can. And unfortunately, on just some of these cases, the evidence, it just isn't there, or we're missing certain pieces to put together. And at the end of the day, as much as we want to help, a prosecutor has to look at what can they take and what can they prove beyond every reasonable doubt in court. So that's what makes it so challenging. But it's never an easy call, because you're hearing just a devastating tragedy that occurred for somebody. And as you know, yeah, we do field a lot of these calls. But at the end of the day, I'm always going to promise them one thing: if we take on the case, we're going to give it everything we had. And I think that, and I think parents will appreciate that, as long as you're upfront with them and you let them know, hey, I don't know if we'll ever be able to make this, but I know we can work hard on it. So that's some of the challenges I think we face. Hopefully, I did a decent job explaining that.
Of course. And Susan, so you spoke about your initial contact with IMPD and the prosecutors. Um, just what made you come? Did you approach the DEA?
Well, so initially, so they shut IMPD and prosecutors shut me down October 25th, 2020. They officially shut me down, said there would be no criminal investigation. Um, I then got on the DEA website and I sent an email, and someone named Craig called me, and he listened to my story, and he asked for the detective and the prosecutor's phone number, because he wanted to speak with them. So I gave him that information, and then I never heard anything back. And in my mind, it was just the prosecution and the detective dismissing me, as a, I don't know, grieving mom who lost her mind. That's how it felt. And in the meantime, I was trying to get back to work. My parents were elderly and sick, and I ended up, quitting my job and taking care of them. And then, so for a year to year and a half, let's see, they shut me down October. Savannah, Nathan's ex-girlfriend, she was vigilant. I would check my case occasionally with Hunter, but she was vigilant. I mean, she checked it all the time. And in November of 2021, she called me, and it was about midnight. And she said, Susie, they arrested him. He's in Brown County, and you'll never guess what it's for. I'm like, fentanyl? She said, yeah. She said, you got to do something. You got to do something. And so when I got off that phone, Luis and Mike, I don't know that I've shared this part of it with you, but all through this, I felt like God was working, that like something was going to happen. And then I felt like I was crazy because no one would listen. And this thought dropped into my head, because when I hung up the phone with Savannah, I said, now what, Lord? And And the thought dropped into my head to email Angela Ganote at Fox 59. So I did. The subject line said, "Please help." And I told her the story and that no one would listen. And I knew something was wrong and I didn't know what to do. And she responded 6 o'clock that morning. And I don't remember the time frame of everything, but I know the story aired February 9th or 10th of 2022. And I got a phone call from Fox 59 the next day, I think, saying that Mike Gannon, and I'd never heard of him before then, but had said that he was head of the DEA in Indy and that he would like to talk to me. Can you call me? And I said, of course. And so I don't remember that conversation at all. My next thing I remember is there were 4 or 5 agents pulling into my driveway a couple weeks later. And I can't even begin to describe over the next 4 months. I remember the first time I met Mike. Um, I went to the federal building downtown, this office, and I met him and Brady and Chris. And I think, some of the guys that had been here. And just the compassion and the warmth and they're incredible people and they won't ever let me compliment them.
And
They
how important how important is that for a victim or a relative of a victim, even if
oh
the results that you are pursuing aren't guaranteed? How important is that empathy and compassion, that bedside manner?
well, I can tell you for me it was life-saving, I think. I honestly don't know. I mean, Nathan's my only child. I don't have anyone. I mean, I have great support network and family, but um I I don't know where I'd be if they hadn't stepped in and listened. I had felt so dismissed and treated like I had lost my mind instead of my son, that I was a mom in denial, that her son was a drug addict, and just so, and a lot of judgment. And then here was someone that listened. And not only did they listen, but they were going to do something about it. And not only that, but they got to know my son, you know, and I trust Justin and Mike are the 2 people that I've gotten to know the most. And they, I don't know what I expected from the DEA, some hardcore, tough guys because they're hardened because of all the stuff I can't imagine that you see. But to be able to maintain, that compassion and truly care, because people know if you're just faking it, and they're so genuine.
Yeah.
Um, I can't say enough. I can't say enough, for them. And the fact that they put on this summit for the for parents every year.
And for
I
those,
think it
yeah,
speaks volumes.
for those who are not familiar, the DEA, past couple of years, we've hosted regional family summits where we bring together families that have lost loved ones due to fatal fentanyl poisonings or other drug overdose deaths. Bring them together to really connect with other family members that have experienced the same thing. The DEA, we attend, we bring our local law enforcement partners, we bring folks from public health, the public sector, education, just to connect and provide them with the resources that they need. A lot of these families either belong to existing organizations and advocacy groups, or they're looking at starting their own initiative. So it's a day of sharing resources and connecting and healing and grieving that we've hosted. And Susan has joined us for several. So has Mike and the folks at the Indianapolis office. Um, Mike, from you had mentioned that these are really, really hard cases to investigate and charge for a variety of reasons. But why is it so important? People think of DEA. Again, there's an impression, like Susan said. People have their own impressions that may have been forged by pop culture, shows, TV. But and people think DEA, they only go after big cartels or big drug trafficking organizations. Why is it important that we also pursue these individual cases where we hold somebody accountable for distributing drugs that result in an overdose death?
Yeah, I mean, it's just so important because, look, a lot of the local departments are overwhelmed with crime and various other issues that are happening in their cities and towns. And when we have the opportunity to look at some of these cases, we can really dig deep and take some time to evaluate what needs to be done in these type of investigations and utilize that type of resource where not every department has that availability. And I think it's really important for people to understand that DEA is great at working hand in hand with local law enforcement entities. And that's the most important thing here. It's the collaborative efforts to be able to get some of the information, go back with our state and local partners and build the case together with the teamwork, because if we try to just do it on our own, we're not going to have any success. We have to rely on our state and local partners, just like it's important when they can rely on us as well and be a team. And the other crucial component to this is your ability to interact with the families that lost a loved one. And I think, like we kind of touched on a little bit earlier, and this is how I kind of feel. When someone picks the phone up and calls me, and even just what Susan was able to share with us, I mean, they're at the lowest point in their life, and they're just heartbroken and devastated. And if they can't call us up, and we can't show some passion or motivation and desire to want to work these cases, like, what are we doing? We have a drug-related homicide occurred, and we got people that are just devastated and feeling helpless, and they're reaching out to us for help. So obviously we're going to give it everything we can, and every course of what we do, we're going to have that compassion for them because they need it and we need it. And for me, it's just been so rewarding when we can make these type of cases and be able to bring a little closure to somebody that will never be the same. And I say this even when we're doing our family summits. To me, parent or loved one that lost an important family member or a loved one in their life, and they get up and they can overcome that tragedy and then go out and talk to other people so they so something like that won't happen to them. In my eyes, they're the real heroes, because I would probably be in the fetal position if something like that ever happened. I mean, I don't even know.
Absolutely.
So important, and just can't thank many people like Susan all throughout the country that are doing this important thing and that have lost someone. But we talked about these type of cases. They are challenging, and I think at the time period when this happened with Nathan, and by the time we were able to get in contact with Susan, we had done some of these cases, and I know that Justin had worked on some in the Southern District of Indiana, the federal system out of Evansville, and I knew he had the skill set to do that. I also knew that Brady had the skill set as an investigator up here, and I knew we could take a good look at this investigation and help build on it. And the important thing is, and I think Susan appreciated just some stuff she learned as a parent, and you're deep diving into this stuff when it comes to a prosecutorial phase, important stuff that has to happen. But we were able to jump into this investigation and work it hand in hand with IMPD and have a lot of things done that needed to that you didn't maybe know a few years ago, and you started putting some stuff together to help the investigation. And I do have to give a ton of credit to the Marion County Prosecutor's Office, especially Ryan Mayer, because it was a no on this case. Work was done, and we had a meeting, and they were able to review what was done and what we were able to kind of look at and piece together, and it was an absolute yes. So not many people would do that when there's a media story that said, hey, they refused to prosecute, and they didn't give up on the case. And I'm just very grateful for that they were able to look at all the evidence that we were able to present and would have been able to put forth had this gone to a trial, and they felt it was comfortable to charge. And more importantly, Susan never gave up on Nathan, and I think that's the story here, and just remarkable focus and drive to get her message out there. And it's very important for people to do that. And it is important for us in the role that we have to sometimes say, I'm sorry, but I don't know if we could make a case. And we have to do that with people sometimes. And it's not easy to do that. And we try to do it in the most compassionate way we can. But I feel, and if I'm wrong, Susan, please let me know. I feel we have to be upfront with the parents, and because I don't ever want to mislead somebody, and that's kind of what I feel about these type of investigations.
Yes, and that was another thing I appreciated so much is, there were times when like I wanted to know, I had so many questions, and Justin, he would tell me like I can't tell you that, it will compromise the case. So he was always upfront with me, and it just showed me, it was a good demonstration of integrity. I knew I could trust them because they didn't lead me on. They never made me any promises or guarantee, but I knew when they said they were going to give it everything they had, I knew that they meant it. And conversations with them supported that, where I wanted information that they had and couldn't give me, and they didn't give me, and I'm thankful for that. Because they knew what they were doing. I've learned so much through this process about the legalities and the electronic trail. And when I have parents reach out to me who've seen Nathan's story, that's the first thing I ask them. Is what do you have their phone? Do you have that the electronic evidence? And just try to direct them from there. I want to call Mike with every single one, but I know I can't do that.
So you mentioned you got the news that Hunter McSwain was arrested on drug charges. So take us through just that evolution of, hearing the news of, um, justice was on its way from him being arrested to the charges to his guilty plea through sentencing. What was that evolution like for you?
Oh, it was a journey. So I think it was Chris that was with you at the time.
Yes.
When you guys came to my office. So Chris called me at work and let me know that him and Mike needed to come by and talk to me for a minute about the case. And when they got there, and this is another, I don't know if I remember everything accurately. I remember Mike telling me that that Justin had arrested Hunter and that charges were brought. I remember crying. I remember hugging Chris and hugging Mike. I There's no words. There's no words. I can't really find to describe how I felt at that moment. Um, but just so thankful to them.
And
So
then,
thankful to the DEA and the work that they did when to bring him to justice. So it took another 2 years. I was prepared for and expecting a trial. He was arrested for dealing, causing death, and I made it clear that that's what I wanted. I knew I didn't get to make that decision, but the prosecutor, Rob, and I had several conversations about that. And, in the end, and I want to share, this is important for me to share. So I was going into court for what I thought was a pretrial conference, and I walked into a plea hearing. And, but what I want to share about that is that I was sitting behind Hunter and his parents. And I was already in shock that it was a plea that I didn't know was coming. But once that kind of sunk in a little bit, I couldn't help but watch him and his parents. And I saw how upset his mom was. And I heard her lean over, and Hunter had to go up front, with the defense. And the judge, was talking, and Hunter's mom said to his dad, they can take him today. And I could hear the panic in her voice. And I just felt really sad that it all had to come to this, that my son's dead. As a mom, and again, there's a lot of mixed feelings in here, but the one that I want to share is that as a mom, I could relate to that fear. I can sit here and say, well, at least you get to visit your son, but that's not the point. The point is that so many lives have been devastated over this, and Hunter is responsible, but he did it via fentanyl, and it's happening. It happens way too much. Um, so, uh, so Hunter, when I heard him, the judge asked him a series of questions, and one of those questions was, do you understand that when you plead guilty, you are stating that you're responsible for killing Nathan May or for the death of Nathan May? And Hunter said, yes, Your Honor. And that moment, that's what I've been waiting to hear. That's from the very beginning, was to take responsibility, and so that was good for me. And then the sentencing came in July, and we all got to make our statements. Mike was there, and again, he didn't have to show up for that,
Right.
But he did. Mike showed up for that. Angela Ganote showed up for that. There were two key people in getting all this going, and they've just been a great support. And so the sentencing, I got to get up there and speak, and say what I felt. Up to that point, I had been hoping that Hunter took responsibility. Like, he'd had a couple years to think about things, and hopefully was staying clean. And but I realized, in the sentencing, I don't believe that he takes responsibility. But that's exactly why stuff like this needs to happen, because people don't take responsibility. They have to be forced into being accountable. Because he broke the law regardless of how he sees it.
And he received, if I recall correctly, total of 12 years, correct?
Yes. 6 for reckless homicide and 6 for dealing a narcotic.
I would imagine as a parent, it's still justice was served. The case was investigated, but this does not make it doesn't make it any easier. So, as a mom, what's next for you? Where do you go from here as far as still with the grieving process and coping and carrying on with your own life?
Lisa, I don't, I've had other people ask me that, and I'm still trying to figure it out. I think, with, not too long after my son died, I was taking care of my parents and trying to deal with all this legal stuff. So right now, since the sentencing, I'm in a stage of my life for the first time since Nathan has died. I'm able to, it's almost in some ways like being at the beginning of it. I don't have any responsibilities right now. And so it's still pretty raw. I have a hard time a lot of days, but I'll tell you what helps me. In the past week, I've gotten 2 phone calls, and this is another thing about the DEA. It's like they, Mike and or Justin pass on names of parents who have are in same situation, have lost their children to fentanyl poisoning, and they connect us, and we get to talk. And I've had 2 calls One was a referral from another parent who had talked to either Mike or Justin, and the other was someone who saw Nathan's story. And right now in my life, those doing little things like that is what helps me feel like I have a purpose. I'm struggling to find my purpose. I thought that I would be. Um, I see a lot of parents doing these amazing things, setting up foundations um, and doing billboard and just doing all this amazing stuff. And I thought that I would be um, getting involved in that stuff. But I don't have the energy. I just feel really weighed down. But I can do little things like this, um, talking to parents on the phone in this podcast. I was really excited to do this because I get to talk about Nathan.
I think
And
Susan, I hate to interrupt this, but could you tell too a little bit about Nathan? Like what I think is important too is as we did our investigation and we learned about Nathan as well. I mean, he worked at Sherman-Williams, I think, for almost 10 years, considered one of the very best employees. And then he was, I think, with elite management as in a valet role there. And it's like talking to their bosses that Justin did, they basically said he was the best employee they had. So when you
yeah,
hear stuff like that, and I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but like when you hear stuff like that, it all boils down to what you're saying. Like, hey, a great kid made some mistakes along the way, and it's important for parents to understand that because it could happen to anybody, and that's the important message here, right? But
yeah.
a great
And like part of the when Justin shared that with me about Nate, it didn't surprise me, but I felt very vindicated because it's like I've been trying to tell the whole world that my son worked two jobs and was really responsible and was not a drug addict, and it wasn't until that Angela and the DEA stepped in that anyone listened. So that was very vindicating for me. But also, like Mike said, it can happen to anyone. Um, I talk to a lot of parents, and one thing I hear, because so many of the children are drug addicts, and they say they were expecting that call. I've heard some parents, not in our circles, but more in my own circles, you know, parents say, well, they knew the risk, and that's a stigma too that I think we have to break. It's Nathan, the only risk he took was he trusted his friend. He trusted his friend that he'd known since high school, um, and the if there was not fentanyl and the drugs, and that these kids would still be here. It wasn't about that they knew the risk. It was that someone laced their drugs, you know. And I think what the DEA is doing is I can't think of the word, but that they're holding the dealers accountable, and not just the big time like cartel dealers, but the ones that are out here every day. I mean, Hunter has been selling drugs since high school, $10, $20 a pop. Who knows how many? I mean, Nathan might not be the only one. I don't know. Um, because he's been doing this since high school, and I'm not trying to imply that there are others, but I mean it's a possibility with anyone who's they don't think about the consequences of what they're doing.
yeah,
And
yeah, you had mentioned just being a part of this podcast and doing what you can, and there are a lot of amazing organizations out there, many throughout our own division that are doing fantastic work. But I think even being able to uh, share your experiences from a perspective of understanding of just really authentic empathy and sympathy of having gone through it, that really is impactful, and you will reach so many families that have already gone through this, and it just might be really consoling for them to hear your story. What other message or advice do you have for families that are listening that have either already gone through this or are completely new to this experience where everything is still raw? What advice or message do you have for those families?
say try, and I think for me it's been so important to connect with other parents, people who know what I'm going through, because no one else, no matter how much how much they love me, or how much while they knew Nathan, no one can understand that pain except for someone who's been through it. So I think that's really important, is to connect with other parents, in the grieving process. I think it looks different for everyone. For me, I've connected with other parents. I've tried grief groups. That hasn't helped me much. One-on-one counseling has helped me in connecting with other parents. And being in recovery, I have an incredible, amazing network. So I've got a lot of support there. And the DEA, I mean, they still check on me. That makes me feel special. It's like, and then as far as like fighting, getting justice, I think that my heart breaks for parents who aren't able to get justice. And I just encourage them like to keep fighting. I mean, if there's so many other avenues, and which again, it goes back to being connected with other parents. I know that anytime I'm ready to try and do something more, that all I have to do is pick up the phone and call one of these parents who are already active, and they will help me get started. So I think it's real important just to know we're not alone.
No, absolutely. Mike, I'll ask you the same question, but from a law enforcement perspective. We've heard, I think Richard Lampy emphasized this before, but what advice would you have from an investigator standpoint for parents that just experienced the loss, or anyone really who experienced the loss of a loved one and maybe in the pursuit of justice? We've heard, like Richard Lampy before mentioned, speed and preservation of evidence, or just being willing to part with that evidence. How important is that from an investigative standpoint?
Yeah, that's right. You have to, and we've said this, throughout the podcast today. It doesn't matter where you are, where you live, who you're from, what your ethnicity is. At the end of the day, this could happen to anybody, any family, and there's no rhyme or reason why it happens to your loved one. And the important message is, especially this is something Mr. Lampy talked about, do not feel ashamed. And that's why it's so important that we're saying it happened to anybody. And at the end of the day, we need the electronic evidence to help support charges for something that there is no voice. So whatever evidence we can come up with, it's important. So if you have stuff like that, the preservation of that type of evidence, and being upfront with law enforcement and willing to help out, it's really important, because sometimes some of the records, if you get brought in a year or two later, you may not be able to get certain pieces of evidence at that point. So it's really important to have trust in law enforcement and want to help out for your loved ones, so you can understand what happened in the investigation, and if and you can allow accountability to occur. So that would be a piece of advice. And talking with people like Susan or even Mr. Lampy, especially, it was important for just some of the things that he said to me. Don't lash out at your loved one. And what ends up happening is oftentimes families can be destroyed because they lost a loved one, and parents can go in other directions because of how they're coping with that loss. And he specialized that to me and really talked about that. And he let me know, like, that would be advice. Like, remember, you have a partner, you have a husband, you have a wife, or you have a loved one. And at the end of the day, don't ruin things in that relationship, because whoever gave the kid the poisonous drug that killed your loved one, don't let them destroy what you still have. And that was an important message I thought that he shared with me. And I think that's an important mechanism for families to consider if they come across a tragedy like this. So that's some of the advice I have. And at the end of the day, anybody that has a situation like this, our hearts go out to you, and obviously we want to bring justice and accountability, especially when you've suffered a tragic loss like this.
Mike, thank you for joining us. And obviously, Susan, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to tell us about Nathan, about the young man that he was, and for sharing your story. So, really, really appreciate you trusting us, both with the investigation and as well as with continuing to help share your story with others.
Yeah, thank you for everything that you do, and especially you, Mike and Justin. And Brady that I've gotten to know, but just the DEA as a whole. I think what you're doing is incredible, and you're making a difference, and we appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Susan. You're the one that's making the difference, and you're out there helping other people. And you've heard me talk about legendary basketball coach John Wooden. You can't live a perfect day until you've done something for someone who can never repay you. And just know you're out there doing that for a lot of people. So God bless you, and thank you for what you do. And it's an honor to know you, and I really appreciate you. So keep your head up, keep fighting, and if you need anything, you let us know, and God bless.
Okay, thank you.